Emmaus, also known as Hamat or Nicopolis, was a large city from the Hellenistic period through the Byzantine period. It is strategically located on the main road from the plains to Jerusalem. It's a little out of focus, but I think you get the idea. Tel Aviv, which you can't see that clearly, is actually on the horizon in the back. Emmaus served as the administrative, military, and economic center of the region. Emmaus is located on the road from Jerusalem to the cities in the Sharon, Jaffa, Caesarea, and Ashkelon, which is about 2 hours' walk from Jerusalem. The distance is said to be about 60 furlongs from Jerusalem to Emmaus, or about 7 miles. The road is full of pilgrims traveling after the celebration of Passover. The gospel story in Luke tells us about the meeting between Jesus after his resurrection and the 2 companions or disciples on the road to Emmaus. The time is Easter evening. Luke verse 13 states, "Now on that same day, 2 of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem." And Luke verse 29 says, "But they urged him strongly, saying, 'Stay with us, because it is almost evening and the day is now nearly over.' So he went in to stay with them." The characters are 3, 2 disciples and Jesus incognito. But in conversation, the 3 function as 2, Jesus and Cleopas, or Jesus and they. What took place was widely known in Luke 24:18. Then one of them, whose name was Cleophas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there these days?" What those events meant in the context of the purposes of what God was not so nearly evident. The dismal demeanor of the 2 travelers, says Luke 24:17b, "They stood still, looking sad," demonstrated that their perception was to the true significance of those events. Their true significance of those events was disparagingly lacking. The disciples told a lot about themselves as they reported their version of recent events of the stranger who had unexpectedly joined them. Because they had underappreciated the full identity of Jesus and the scope of his role in God's reclamation program for all of creation. And the consequence was calamitous. They knew only part of the incredible story of Holy Week. They, like the other disciples, were reluctant to grant gullibility to the women's report, even when ratified and explained by a vision of angels. And when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us what they had indeed seen, a vision of angels who said that he was alive. They did not make the essential connection between the fate of Jesus and the messianic anticipations confirmed in Scripture. Jesus called them foolish in Luke 25:26. "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe that what the prophets had declared. Was it not necessary for the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" The cumulative disclosure of God's will and purposes, as revealed throughout Moses and the prophets, pointed toward and found fulfillment in Jesus. In Jesus. It reinforced for his hearers the recognition of the tremendous importance of those events as components of the church's testimony. On the lips of Cleopas, Luke gives a summary of the gospel in verses 18 through 24, beginning with the ministry of Jesus and concluding with the report, but not the experience of the risen Christ. Cleophas' summary is incomplete until Christ adds the word of resurrection in verse 26 by asking, was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory? Christ then makes himself known to them in verse 31 with, then their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. Concise statements about Jesus, his mighty works, suffering, death, and resurrection are the content of the gospel story and are found in other books. It is found repeatedly in Acts, for Acts 2:31 through 32 states, foreseeing this, David spoke of the resurrection of the Messiah, saying, he was not abandoned to Hades, nor did his flesh experience corruption. This Jesus God raised up, and of that all of us are witnesses. 5 times Christ is seen the same day that he rose, by Mary Magdalene alone in the garden. When she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there. But she did not know that it was Jesus. By the women, as they were going to tell the disciples, suddenly Jesus met them and said, greetings. And they came to him, took hold of his feet, and worshiped him. By Peter alone, and by the 2 disciples going to Emmaus, and now at night by the 11. When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked for fear, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. It well becomes the disciples of Christ, when they are together, to talk of his death and resurrection. Thus they may improve one another's knowledge, refresh one another's memory, and stir up another's devout affections. Disciples witness, meaning they gave evidence. After seeing, after hearing, after walking and eating with Christ, they gave evidence to what they saw and what they heard. The 2 disciples went back from Emmaus to Jerusalem. That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered there. They were saying, the Lord has risen, and he has appeared to Simon. Then they told what had happened on the road, and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of bread. The disciples, having borne witness to the risen Christ, now testify as to what they saw. Testify meaning to affirm something from experience, to make a factual statement based on personal experience, or declare something to be true from personal experience. The disciples speak of what they experienced. They share the good news. Having been turned from sadness and despair by having a table with Christ, they now recognize. Their excitement moves them naturally towards their brothers and sisters who have been trapped in the same hopelessness. Their witness is to other disciples, not to the world. That task must wait until they are empowered from on high. The message that creates a believing community needs to be heard again and again by that community. To do so is to confirm, to strengthen, to encourage, and to deepen the faith. The return to Jerusalem joins the experience of these two disciples to that of Simon Peter, and that of the 11 in the company of others. While they are talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." They are startled and terrified and thought they were seeing a ghost. He said to them, "Why are you frightened, and why do doubts arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and feet. See that it is I, myself. Touch me and see, for a ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have." And when he said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. While in their joy, they were disbelieving and still wondering, he said to them, "Have you anything here to eat?" They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it in their presence. Their different encounters with the risen Christ, their individual testimonies, are thus understood as one corporate experience. This fact is very important in the opening of Acts, for the church after Jesus begins with all the disciples together making a common witness. For it reads, "But Peter, standing with the 11, raised his voice and addressed them, 'Men of Judea and all who live in Jerusalem, let this be known to you, and listen to what I say.'" Individually and collectively, they share the good news, the gospel, the good news